You're listening to Life, the Universe, and Everything Else. Today we're talking about Behind the Curve. Life, the Universe, and Everything Else explores the intersection of science and society. If you have questions or comments about the show, or you'd like to suggest a topic, you can find us on Twitter or Facebook, or send us an email at lueepodcast@winnipegskeptics.com. Show notes and references can be found at lueepodcast.com. My name is Ashlyn Noble, and I'll be your host this evening. With me today, I have Laura Creek Newman.
Hi there.
Jem Newman.
Hello.
And Lauren Bailey.
Hi.
So we have been having a rough month around here, and we decided in advance that we were going to use that opportunity to watch a movie and talk about it in the grand tradition of LUEE. So we decided to take none of your suggestions because none of you sent any. And harsh.
A bunch of people told us we were wrong, but
now they won't send us any ever.
It's been a bad month, okay? Sorry, guys, but please, comments, suggestions.
But yes, I made a really embarrassing mistake on last month's show, and I said that the liver was above the diaphragm. I don't know what I was thinking, or whether I was just reading something I had written down wrong, or what happened there. The liver is definitely below the diaphragm. So thank you for that correction.
yeah, I didn't catch that while I was editing either, which does not exactly bode well for the MCAT that I'm writing in August. But Andy sent us in a correction, so thanks for that, Andy. Arguably, speaking of corrections, I also didn't do a fantastic job of answering the question, why are plants green? Sure, the answer is that chlorophyll is green, and I went into a long discussion of chlorophyll and other plant photosynthetic pigments. So chlorophyll is green. And it does do a pretty good job of capturing a lot of the electromagnetic spectrum, at least the visible parts of it. But the question is, wouldn't it be more efficient if the plant could absorb all of the light that came its way? So plants have been at this whole photosynthesis thing for almost 1 billion years, which is a lot of time for evolution to work its magic. So why aren't plants black? Interestingly, while the white light of the sun is made up of all the colors of the visible spectrum, the radiation from the sun peaks around the blue-green portion of the spectrum. So it makes even less sense that plants would be reflecting away all of this green light, right? When green light is so abundant in the light from the sun. This is actually a question that I was planning to tackle last time, but I didn't go into details because it would have, one, made my segment way longer than it already was, but also, two, like I mentioned, a bunch of the questions that I was talking about, or that I was that I was considering talking about, were ones that scientists don't actually know the answer to, and saying, I don't know, over and over again, doesn't exactly make for great podcasting.
But it is good science.
It is good science. Since Andy brought this up, I might as well get into it. So why aren't plants black? Well, scientists don't know, but there are some hypotheses. In the show notes, I'll link to a video from PBS Digital Studios discussing a few of these hypotheses, but I'll give a brief sketch of a couple of them here. So, in many environments, when exposed to full sun, plants don't do so well, right? They can wither and die. Not all plants are made for full sun.
They can get sunburnt.
Gardeners know this, right? And when exposed to full sun, plants with darker leaves tend to overheat more. This damages them. That doesn't exactly make for great evolutionary fitness. You know, if you're dying from having these darker leaves, you're absorbing more radiation than you need. You're overheating. So one hypothesis is that chlorophyll strikes a good balance between absorbing enough energy to keep the plant alive while also reflecting away enough energy to keep the plant from dying. As I discussed in the episode, other photosynthetic pigments do exist, and different organisms use different combinations of them. Some are used by plants, some are used by prokaryotes, some by both. One hypothesis is that there was a time when pigments other than chlorophyll were dominant, or the dominant organisms used photosynthetic pigments other than chlorophyll. So halobacteria, for example, absorb mostly green light, but reflect blue and red light, which happens to be the wavelengths that plants, green plants, and algae absorb the best. So in an environment dominated by these kind of organisms like halobacteria, green light would be more available because it's reflected by these other dominant organisms rather than gobbled up by all of their neighbors. So this would make plants and algae the scrappy underdogs in that ecosystem, and they could have hypothetically then come to dominate thereafter. While some plants use other dark pigments to absorb more light, modern plants are descended from organisms that predominantly used chlorophyll. In most environments, there isn't really a lot of selective pressure to develop a different pigment. So the most likely hypothesis is that everything else being equal, chlorophyll's good enough. Plants don't need to be black. So they stay green.
Nature is messy. Not everyone is a goth.
I wish the whole planet was still purple, like there are some theories that it was.
Yeah.
Any other excruciating screw-ups that we made last month?
Not that I'm aware of so far.
No one has alerted us to them yet, anyway.
But please do if you find them.
I love adding little correction notes to our show notes.
And I love editing them, Jem.
So what did we just watch?
Behind the Curve.
A love story, a woodworking tutorial, futuristic solar-powered motorcycle.
I thought
That's what we watched.
Wasn't it a plug-in electric? Was it solar
Maybe it wasn't solar. It was
of
definitely
conferences.
electric. Yeah, lots of conferences.
A very supportive mum.
Oh, such a supportive mom.
So what was this documentary, Ashlyn?
So Behind the Curve is a documentary that sort of compared and contrasted two conferences that were going on at the same time-ish. And we looked into several big-name flat earthers, or flerfers, apparently.
Flerfers.
Flerfers is apparently the name that they call themselves, which, okay, you get to label yourselves. That's cool.
Well, that's what's on Urban Dictionary. I don't know if that's what they call themselves.
That's true. We didn't hear it in the movie.
FE is a term that they throw around quite a lot.
And they have a hand signal.
Holding your arm flat and level, as in the flat earth. So we open with an introduction to Mark, who frequently wears a shirt that says, "I am Mark Sargent." Also sometimes has a name tag on at the same time that says Mark.
Yeah. So Mark says that we are winning against science, and he is the prime flat earther.
He is the mayor
The
of
king.
Flat Earth.
Yeah, the king of the flat earth. Who, at one point early in the film, calls Neil deGrasse Tyson, he who shall not be named.
And I had a lot of complaints about Neil deGrasse Tyson, but
Yeah.
the science is usually there. Maybe
He
not
who
so-
must not be named.
Maybe
Yeah,
don't
he-
touch your
he-
grad students, Neil, but
yeah.
still.
He also is kind of the worst kind of nitpicker.
And this comes from Jem.
Yeah, no, I know. Oh boy, I'm also the worst kind of nitpicker. I'm intolerable.
I don't know. Tell us about photosynthesis.
Right from the get-go, we get kind of one of the prime arguments in the film, the argument for the Earth being flat, which is a similar argument that is made actually by geocentrists. Early on in the Winnipeg Skeptics, we had an influx of like hundreds of comments because Rochelle had made a post. She had gone to some geocentrist, Robert Sungenis, who was talking at, I think it was U of M. They'd rented a room, It's not actually a U of M lecture. And she was critical of what Sungenis had to say, and a bunch of geocentrists came in to the comments, and the arguments overlap to a large degree. So one of the huge arguments that was made here a couple times is that the Earth can't possibly be moving 1,000,000 miles an hour because you don't feel anything. But this is, of course, for those, who remember their high school physics, this is a misunderstanding of like what we feel when we feel motion. We don't actually feel velocity. What we feel is acceleration. We and the Earth share a common frame of reference. So when you throw a ball up into the air and it comes back down, it is moving relative to you and moving relative to the Earth. But the fact that the Earth is spinning, it is rotating and revolving, that doesn't cause the ball, as soon as it leaves your hand, to suddenly fly away toward the horizon because the Earth is spinning underneath it, right? In the same way that when you jump, you don't suddenly fly backward because the Earth spins underneath you.
That'd be a cool way to travel, though.
It would be a cool way to travel. But you might think, if you don't have a lot of book learning about physics, you might wonder why that is. And the reason is that you are moving along with the Earth. And by jumping, you are still moving along with the Earth.
At the same pace.
At the same pace. And so you and the Earth are sharing a frame of reference. This is actually an example that was used in the film. If you're on a bus or in a car and you have a ball in your hand and you throw the ball up, the car could be moving at...
For some reason, he used the example of a bowl. I don't know why.
No, he said a ball.
Yeah, I
think
think
he definitely said a ball. It's just an accent. Yeah.
Well, my bad. I was wondering why he was throwing bowls around in the car.
No, it was definitely a ball.
So you're traveling, along at 100 kilometers an hour on the highway, and you throw a ball up into the air. The ball doesn't suddenly fly through your back windshield because it is not moving at 100 kilometers per hour. It is moving along with you. So even though you throw it from your perspective straight up into the air from your frame of reference, an observer who is watching from the side of the road would see the ball move up into the air, but also continue moving forward at 100 kilometers per hour. Another sort of demonstration of this principle is when your car is accelerating to that 100 kilometers per hour, you feel yourself getting pressed back into your seat because you're feeling that acceleration. But as soon as you reach 100 kilometers per hour, if you close your eyes, you'll feel like a rumble because the car is moving up and down, side to side a little bit. But you don't feel the motion of traveling forward. You're not continually pressed into your seat unless you are continually accelerating. And of course, you are continually accelerating downward. But
this is not a physics lesson, Jem.
Of course it is.
I mean, we would sure feel it if the Earth suddenly stopped.
Right. Well, yeah. I think if somehow the Earth suddenly stopped, we would all turn into jelly.
Stop the world and melt with you. You've seen the difference and it's getting better all the time. There's nothing you and I won't do.
What if it just slowly decelerated?
We'd
That'd
still
be
end up
exciting.
dead. No.
I feel like the car's a good example, or anytime you've ever been on an airplane, the fact that when you take off, you're glued against your seat, but then once you're at cruising altitude, you can walk around, you can do all sorts of stuff. It's like you're not moving at all.
Yeah.
And you can look down and you see the clouds and everything. You can see the farmland passing underneath of you. You can see it going, but you're just like, la-da-da, I can do some jumping jacks, walk backwards, forwards, whatever.
What kind of
Have you
plane
ever
are
done
you
a
on?
jumping jack in a plane?
No, but you could. I'm not saying it would be pleasant. I'm just saying you could.
And it's interesting because we see Mark, the protagonist of this film.
Main character.
Yeah. He doesn't do a lot of pro-tagging, but
He does a
Mark
lot
of
of
this
self-tagging.
he takes a lot of planes. And so you'd think like he is one of the many people who makes this argument, that, you don't feel the movement, but you don't feel the movement in a plane either. So, and that is a much better illustration because you're moving so much faster than a car.
Well, and apparently one of the ways that he was convinced about flat Earth was because of planes
Flight
and their
paths.
routes.
Yeah.
So he apparently watched flight paths for several hours.
I think he said days at one point, presumably not continuously.
Continually, yeah. And no plane ever went between, for example, South America and Africa.
So the reason why this is relevant is because the flat Earth model used by all of these flat earthers is that the North Pole is actually the center of a disk.
Plane, yeah.
Okay, we're in Terry Pratchett land here, and the North Pole is at the center of the disk. The South Pole is actually not a single point; it is the edge of the disk.
Mm-hmm.
So Antarctica is an ice wall.
A 200-foot tall ice wall. I don't know where they came up with that number. They never explained it.
They watched Game of Thrones. Claim didn't get made in this film, but some of them do claim that the ice wall is patrolled by CIA agents to prevent you from getting over it.
You'll get shot down.
Did they mention
they
that in
didn't
this
say
one?
that.
No, okay.
I've done some outside reading.
Right, yeah. and so the reason you wouldn't, according to Mark and a lot of these flerfers, the reason you wouldn't expect to see planes flying between different locations in the Southern Hemisphere is that the Southern Hemisphere, all of the continents are much farther apart than they are in the Northern Hemisphere.
So it would make no sense to go from the tip of South America to Africa And in reality, it doesn't make a lot of sense because there aren't a ton of flights that go between those two places. And also it's over a lot of ocean, which is really dangerous.
So this is economies of scale at work, right? You know, you don't fly in between small remote locations that are less popular. Instead, you fly in between small remote locations and large centers, and then large centers in between each other. That makes travel a lot more efficient. If you look at any kind of distributed network, that's the kind of pattern that you see.
Well, and for various reasons, you just don't take what seems like, in quotation mark, the most obvious path for
Right.
things. An example, when we went to Singapore, we took a flight over the North Pole to get to Hong Kong, I think it was. We went from Chicago to Hong Kong over the North Pole.
Proof of the
When you-
flat Earth.
Cool.
Yeah. So when you think about it on a map, just thinking like a human being, you would think, well, to get to continent, I would go from continent to continent. I wouldn't go from continent to continent over the pole. I would go
on
around
the flat Earth,
middle,
it was the
right?
straightest line.
Yeah. Just an extra factor. Planes need to take into account wind patterns and weather patterns and systems and things like that too. So if weather patterns aren't accommodating in certain places, they change their flight routes. So again, it may not make sense to fly from the tip of South America to the tip of Africa because of weather or something like that. So maybe it makes more sense that they have to go on a different trajectory.
One of my favorite parts was immediately after that.
Yeah.
They showed a physicist tracking a bunch of flight paths and just being like, where are you going, little buddy?
Well, that one looks like it's going south.
Yeah.
That, and then she said, that really wasn't a hard search at all.
So you do see these. They're definitely less common, but they do happen. So you do see flights in between the southern hemisphere continents.
Yeah,
But
totally.
that's how they get you.
They're planted, remember, Jem?
Yeah.
Right. But conspiracy theorists would make the argument that, well, those are fake flights and those flights don't really exist. Well, at that point, like, why even bother making the argument that I looked at all of these flight trackers and none of these flights were happening? Because that argument is self-defeating if your response to countervailing evidence is that, well, those flight trackers are made up anyway.
Yeah.
Well, then
Yeah.
your original evidence doesn't make any sense.
Well, and
Yeah.
I think that was one of the big themes of the movie is that
Yeah.
they kept asking folks like what sort of evidence would change your mind, and talking about how if nothing is falsifiable about your argument, then there is no reason to have this discussion and debate. And so they were switching between the perspectives of some scientists who had kind of given up on having this debate, and others who were saying like, well, if we don't interact with them, then we're just pushing them further to the fringes.
Yeah, and that's the film was not endorsing the conspiracy theory. There were lots of scientists who were involved in it too, and it was, I don't know how the rest of you felt, but I really enjoyed this documentary. It was quite compassionate, and that was one of, I think, the best takeaways from it. One of several very good takeaways, which is to always ask yourself, no matter what you believe, what sort of evidence would convince you that you might be wrong? And they asked these people that a few times, and they actually. Should we talk about some of the experiments that they did?
Yeah, they proved the Earth was round like 3 times in this movie.
Yeah, it was pretty good. So one of the things that they did is they spent $20,000 on a laser gyroscope, and this is a specific thing that Sanjenis brought up too. Thinking back, I think we talked about geocentrism in like episode 15 of this podcast.
Yeah, like way back
think
in the
so.
day.
Yeah, they spent $20,000 on a laser gyroscope that would allow them to detect and sort of prove that the Earth is not rotating, because even within the rotational reference frame, you would be able to detect a drift that should be equal to about 15 degrees an hour, because 360 degrees divided by 24 is 15. And so
Oh. Okay.
they spent all this money on this gyroscope, and they did the experiment, and sure enough, they showed a drift of 15 degrees per hour, which is exactly what we would expect, but
Well, they
said,
decided-
obviously, we were taken aback, so we started to look for things that could disprove it.
Yeah, and they thought, well, maybe this is just the firmament, the sky.
Yeah. The heaven energy.
It's just detecting that moving around.
Yeah, the gyroscope was picking up the rotation of the heavens.
Yeah, and so they decided to try and isolate the gyroscope in various ways, and as as of the recording of the documentary, they had not found a solution yet.
No.
They had not yet found a way in which they could not prove that the Earth was was round.
Yeah. Somehow bismuth was going to stop it from that.
They were going to encase it in bismuth. Yeah.
I'm not sure how or why that would help, but maybe it blocks the heaven energies, and so that's the case.
Nausea, heartburn,
I'm not clear on
indigestion.
what-
I was having diarrhea.
So one of the sound bites that we got when they were talking about designing all of these experiments is, wow, I have a lot more respect for scientists now. Designing experiments
No.
is
They
hard.
didn't say scientists. They did
no,
not.
no.
No, for the
Right.
people who do experiments.
People who do not
This
scientists.
is a lot harder than
Yeah.
I thought.
My-
They specifically did not mention science and scientists.
Right. The implication was it is a lot harder to design the experiment such that you will get the answer that you want, which is actually something that you spend a lot of time trying not to do in science.
Well, you
Yeah.
should.
Yeah.
And the one guy, one of my favorite lines was, "The most surprising thing I've learned is that experiments are hard."
So, and that's so interesting. Again, it comes into that, if you want to think back, because as they mentioned many times, flat earthing, if you're going to accept flat earth, you pretty much have to accept every other conspiracy theory out there.
It
Like
is
you
the
just,
center of the web.
it is the center of the
I like
web,
flat Earth
as
as
one
a
person
gerund.
said.
Flat earthing.
It just, so it comes back to that, elitist, they're not actually doing anything. They're just hiding the truth from us kind of thing. So it's like, oh, it's not that hard to do this stuff. I can do it. And they're like, oh, actually, maybe these people know something I don't know.
Well, and probably the last time that they had to design, quote unquote, any kind of experiment was in, their 11th grade science class.
When they should have learned about inertial reference frames and acceleration.
I sure didn't.
No, because you learn that stuff in physics. You don't learn that in bio.
Yeah, but I don't know. You didn't
Science
take grade 11
isn't
physics?
required to
Nope.
graduate from high
Oh,
school.
right. Yeah, I was in
All
We
you
were not required to take that. And
No.
I did not.
Science is not required to graduate from high school, at least here. And when I graduated, it certainly wasn't.
What kind of province is this?
You need a grade 12 math and a grade 12 English, and you can graduate.
I needed 4 math credits, 5 English credits, 3 science credits.
Well, I mean,
But that's in your whole high school career.
yeah, like
not in grade
you have
12.
to, you have to have everything that leads up to this. So in order to get your grade 12 math, you have to have your grade 11 math, and you have to have everything leading up to it. But in grade 12, you needed a math credit, a grade 12 level math credit, and a grade 12 level English credit. Everything else is extra.
I like learning, and I think that it's important. I'm not trying to be snooty about my interest in science.
Yeah, there's plenty of other learning.
Sure, but it serves a point, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, that you're bringing up, that things are just not available to people or not required of it. When my parents talk about what was required learning when they went to school back in the 60s, it is very different than what is required learning now.
Well, and also I went to high school 23
Yes, you're old.
years ago, so I have no idea what's required now. They removed an entire grade since I left.
That's true. Yeah. I was not in high school in Ontario, so I never had grade 13.
OAC,
Right.
at my time.
One thing we did learn in this documentary is that the heliocentric model is forced sun worship.
Yes, loved that.
Yeah. So some of these people are really deep into their conspiracy theories, starting with the idea that nothing can be trusted. And a lot of them were claiming that, science worship, NASA is doing human sacrifice and blood magic or blood rituals. Sorry. I think that's what the term that they used.
They really dislike NASA. Everything NASA says is a lie, obviously, because if it were otherwise, then their whole thing would be trash. So they even went to the Space Museum in Houston at one point and just walked around yelling, "The Earth is flat," and playing with the displays and being like, "Well, I think everything here is fake." And
Well, it's a display,
evangelizing to people in parking lots. That was really uncomfortable.
that was very weird.
Yeah. A few of them were talking about, I don't know who's behind this, the Rothschilds. Some people say the Jews, the Vatican for sure.
Oh, definitely the Vatican. It's weird how many conspiracy theories come down to the Vatican.
It's any group that is
it's
closed,
Protestantism.
sort of secretive, and has a lot of power.
A lot of power and money and centralized. Yeah.
Exactly. And so it just shifts depending on
Oh, yeah. But
who you are and stuff like that. But yeah, if Protestantism had a body like the Vatican, it would be right up there too.
We also saw, this conspiratorial mindset starting to cannibalize the groups themselves. There's this one character in the film called Patricia Steer, who runs like an internet radio show, and she is very close.
Flat Earth and other hot potatoes.
Flat Earth and other hot potatoes. She is close with Mark Sargent. There's a will they, won't they subplot running throughout the film.
Really long.
And if you like your conspiracy movies to have rom-com subplots, this is the movie for you.
Yeah.
Well, there's romance and comedy, but they don't exactly go together like peanut butter and chocolate in this one. But she is, a darling of the movement at one point, but through a mixture of conspiracy mongering and, just like basic misogyny, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
Segments of the movement are convinced that she is actually a CIA plant. One of the arguments that they use is that her name, Patricia, ends in CIA.
And that is proof that she must be a CIA agent that has been planted there.
And she steers people towards the conspiracy.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh.
She said, would the CIA be that foolish? Or something like that. And through the center of the film, as she's observing these other people...
Will she or won't she figure out that she is a conspiracy theorist?
Yeah. Or, no, conspiracy realist. Excuse me. That is the term that she prefers. You see it starting to dawn on her that the mindset that these people who are accusing her of being a CIA plant, that mindset is rampant in the community. And, how... And she's talking about how there's no evidence that she can present that will convince these people that she's not a CIA plant. Mm-hmm. And you see the gears turning in her head, but she turns away from it.
Well, she even goes as far as saying like, well, and then I think maybe I have this same mindset, but no.
But no, I'm not one of them. It's the natural process of change. Mm-hmm. I hope she'll get there because the gears have started turning. There are thoughts in her head. She sees that there is a different way of looking at things. But it's also uncomfortable and unsafe in some ways to leave it behind. So...
Yeah, and that's something that they hit on pretty hard near the end of the film with Mark Sargent. When he is keynoting this conference, there's some interviews with him backstage, and they're talking about how, this community means so much to these people. A lot of them have lost their kids, lost their families. A lot of them are disconnected from everyone. And that's something that you see with cults. I mean, this isn't exactly a cult, but there are some parallels.
It's a cultic mindset.
Yeah. And you see, like, if some of these people changed their minds and stopped believing that the earth was flat, they'd have nobody.
Mm-hmm. They would lose everybody that they know and all of their community ties and all of their Facebook groups and everything.
Yeah. And Mark Sargent, like the mayor of Flat Earthville, he would go from being a big shot to being nobody, like to basically being a laughingstock in the real world and in the greater culture. So what's in it for him to leave this behind?
Mm-hmm. And they basically ask him that at the end because the whole time they've been comparing the flat Earth to the Truman Show and how Jim Carrey's character left as soon as he figured out what was going on because there was nothing for him in the bubble. But they asked Mark, like, well, you're basically the mayor.
Well, because Mark brought up the point that
this is Mark's analogy, the whole Truman Show.
Yeah. But they asked him, like, well, you wouldn't leave though because you are the mayor and you have all of these things, all of the cronies and whatnot. And they said, well, you wouldn't leave, would you? And they just sort of faded to black after that. He didn't really have a good answer.
And there were a couple points in the film where you see editing being used to make a point, and it's not clear. At one point, Mark's mother is asked if she believes in the flat Earth, and she sort of hesitates and hems and haws, and there's a cutaway to Mark's reaction to this, and then cut back to her. And those sorts of cutaways, I don't know if they were actually using a 2-camera setup or if that was a cut.
They were not
inserted.
using a 2-camera setup in this.
Yeah,
no.
I doubt it. It's possible. But those sorts of editing techniques are arguably deceptive. I mean, like technically deceptive, I guess. It certainly is funny to see that insert shot of him reacting, but who knows what he was actually reacting to.
If we want to talk about narrative tension, we can have an entire podcast about these kind of editing tricks.
That might be a good one. Yeah. His mom was just a gem, though. She was so good in this film. She was just like,
not a Jen Newman, an actual
No, somebody who's actually very kind and nice. A warm person.
Yeah, she's just like so supportive and like, oh yeah, I don't tell people what Mark gets up to, but you know, he can do whatever he wants.
I want him to be happy, and I want him to have, a good life.
Yeah.
Such a mum.
And I'll keep making him chicken noodle soup and his favorite applesauce dessert.
What was
and
it?
that
Iced
applesauce, which I can only imagine is like frozen applesauce.
Yeah.
So it's like an ice cream type thing.
One thing that always strikes me with these sorts of belief systems is how many people would have to be involved in the conspiracy. Like, not only every single working scientist in,
Like, when do they sit you down and have the talk?
Yeah. And what do they do if you say, hey, I'm going to make a lot of money by going public with this? Like, are there lots of scientists being murdered all the time to keep them quiet?
Maybe that's why Harper was silencing.
Right, yeah. Every single pilot would need to obviously see the actual globe in order to, the actual disc.
Yeah.
In order to fly the plane.
Stanley Kubrick for faking the moon landing.
Right, yeah.
Well, and it's like the meme says, anybody who believes in conspiracy theories has never been a project manager because 12 people can't get it right.
As Ben Franklin said, 3 may keep a secret if 2 of them are dead.
Yeah.
I want to talk about Jaronism.
Okay.
Jaron Campanella. He's the YouTube flat earther, and he was the one out on the lake holding up the things that was proven wrong at the end. And I know Ross and Carrie did a really good episode about this experiment out in the Salt Flats or wherever.
Yeah, well, Ross and Carrie did like an 8-parter on
Yeah,
flat Earth
series,
They,
yeah.
they,
They were
they were
there
actually
for this
present
experiment.
for
Well, Ross
some,
was at
some
least,
of this.
I think.
So we'll link to at Ross and Carrie in the show notes. And also there's a couple of really good YouTube videos debunking this stuff by H Bomber Guy and Philosophy Tube that I'll link to as well.
But do not just search Flat Earth on YouTube, because what did they say? There's over 1 million videos now?
Only go to our links. Our links are the only ones you can trust. Do not do your own research.
I mean, if
You
you
will
think Jem
believe.
goes on really long tangents, you should hear these guys. Holy moly, they just never shut up.
And you don't want to fall asleep to them because it will just get in there.
Ross and Carrie also did quite a long interview with Mark Sargent, and he just really talks a lot.
Yeah, you can see that. The more he talks, the more it builds that adrenaline rush for him. And he just gets going on a tangent.
So, an example of his ego was when they were talking about symbiotic creatures.
Oh yeah.
And Patricia, I think,
Yeah, it was
said
Patricia.
something about how, there's the whales and the little creatures that live on them and,
She
and
said
clean them.
the other fish.
the
yeah.
other little fish, yeah.
And they were like the whale and the little creature because they had each other on each other's shows and, raised each other's profiles. And Mark goes, well, I hope I'm the whale. You just can't handle being the other part of this equal equation. That's
Yeah.
really sad.
Yeah, it is really sad. And this is a woman that he clearly has a thing for.
Oh yeah.
yeah.
And
real
he
bad.
still says this.
Yeah. He wants to be the alpha male.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Well, that's why he wears his name on his shirt, so everybody knows it.
Sorry, Lauren, you were going to talk about the this experiment, right? Or this guy who was doing the experiment?
Jaron, yeah. It was the final moments of the documentary.
It was good.
They proved that there was a curve to the Earth,
Again?
and all he can say is interesting. I was looking at a review of the movie Zoncora, Glenn Rager.
So the film has a 100% fresh rating on Rotten Tomatoes, but it has a 6.5 out of 10 on IMDb from user reviews. It appears to have been brigaded by flat earthers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jaron did say that later after the film came out, he denied the results.
Of course he did.
Yeah. And that it didn't prove what they said it proved.
Well, they didn't.
What
They,
did it-
they
they
didn't
didn't say
say it
anything.
proved
Proved
anything. They
anything.
just
No,
show. It's one of those very nice documentaries where I think you hear 2 or 3 questions being asked at one point, but for the rest of it, it's just all the words of the subjects.
Yeah.
I mean, it was an interesting experiment. They basically took these big plastic panels out onto a lake and lined them up so that there were holes in them. And so the holes lined up along the lake, and they shone a laser through them. And if the Earth was flat, it should be able to go across this large distance with the laser going through every hole and hit the plaque at the end. But they finally got their whole experiment worked out, and they turned on the laser, and he goes, I don't see anything. Are you sure it's on? Are you sure it's getting this far? And then they say, well, lift it up above your head, and it shows up on the reading, and that's how they end the movie is, interesting. But it's a really cool experiment that really shows,
Yeah.
you know?
Because in order to get those three in a line...
Yeah, it was hard for me to picture it in my head when I was listening to the Ross and Carrie episode, because Ross was out there with them, and seeing it on the screen made it make much more sense.
Yeah, the visuals were good. I just needed more time to parse them, but I'm also really tired, so.
Did anybody get the name of that guy?
Which guy?
The blonde one. The one who was banned from the conference.
Matt Boylan or Math Powerland.
Right, Math Powerland. Not to be confused with Powerland in Winnipeg on Marion Avenue.
He is the guy who claims to have invented the Flat Earth movement.
Yeah, I made Flat Earth.
I made Flat Earth. He takes full credit for it, whether it is deserved or not, and he makes sure everybody knows that.
There are schisms within the Flat Earth movement, as there are in
Shocking.
almost any movement, more than 5 people.
Right.
Yeah.
But he's... So
3 can get along if 2 of them are dead.
What's that make us?
Well, Jem doesn't believe in free will, so he doesn't count.
That's true.
he was very intense. He was your classic conspiracy theorist shouting into a camera, making videos guy, but it was to a different level.
Yeah, Laura was sitting on the couch beside, and I could feel you kind of visibly recoil every time. It's like, that man needs help. Somebody get him help.
He does. He really did. You know, he was like that. They gave an example of some of the things that he was doing, but it was that high, like super intense, CIA is watching me, I've got to wear a tinfoil hat kind of rhetoric.
I was really worried for the unnamed woman sitting on the couch behind him playing on her phone while he was doing his YouTube rants.
Yeah.
I don't know who she is.
It was very uncomfortable, and you just looking at him physically, he seems like somebody who's like hasn't had enough sleep and maybe isn't eating well. And I'm not trying to project anything, but it's just kind of like, I think you're not okay.
Yeah,
I'm concerned about you because you just all of these factors together are.
Maybe you should go talk to Mark Sargent's mum.
Yeah,
She'll make you some soup.
Make some soup.
Maybe you need a
Feel
mummy.
better. But he doesn't like Mark Sargent, and actually he refused to he appeared via archival footage in this documentary, but he refused to appear and to be interviewed in the documentary unless they agreed to a few stipulations, including that he get 12% of the return
and $5,000.
And
front.
like a whole bunch of money up front, thousands of dollars, and that the documentarians would admit that Mark Sargent is a CIA operative.
No. He's a secret Warner Brothers executive.
Oh, right. Yeah. Sorry.
That was the thing.
weird.
There was a
Brothers
clip from a
executive,
video where he was yelling about how Mark Sargent is secret
And
Warner
he had to
Brothers.
appear-
Warner Brothers, it's Warner. I'm like, really? Of all the companies, Warner Brothers?
That's all, folks.
There's a title card that just sort of laid out all of these demands, and then the words just fade in. We were not able to meet these demands.
Yeah. Very good use of the title card there.
Yeah.
Anybody have any other notes that they wrote down? I wrote down, "This is sun" or something, and don't know where I was going with that one.
Oh, the sun and the moon are lights that are hung in the sky or something.
They didn't
like
really
that.
get into that as much as I thought they were going to. Like they didn't talk as much about the actual theory. They didn't get into what they believe as much, just how they think they believe it. But they had some beautiful models, and
They had Organite.
Yes, they had a guy who actually made these beautiful models on there, and this guy made a giant coffee table and lots of clocks and fancy watches.
May I read from his website?
If you must.
Organite is a substance made of resin, metals, and quartz that balances and harmonizes bioenergy, otherwise known as orgone, chi, or prana.
It just goes into the whole, how the flat earth is the center of the web of conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
We heard everything from anti-vax to, did we hear any hollow earthers?
No, I think those two would be mutually.
You never know. There could be like a cave underneath.
Yeah. Well, that's something that I've always wondered. I guess because they don't believe in spaceships, they can't answer the question. But it would be. I would like to know what they think is like around the edge.
Yeah, what's out there?
And, a lot of them believed in a firmament, but some of them believed in like an infinite plane. And some seemed to think that there were actual other bodies in the sky. But if those were also disks, what are the odds that they would never be seen edge on? Maybe that's what galaxies are.
Yeah.
Well, galaxy brain moment right
the
there.
firmament isn't transparent.
I don't know which version of the firmament they believe in, but traditionally the firmament was like opaque, but the stars were holes in the firmament through which
Right.
the light of God
That's not
shone
what
through.
they were referring to,
No.
though.
Yeah,
For them,
no, I
it's
know.
like a physical dome.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is
if
they
you
don't
had-
all believe in the firmament.
Yeah.
There's a
So
few
some of them
different
seem to
versions.
think that there are actual celestial bodies, and I was just wondering if those were also discs.
Yeah.
Yes,
There are
they
some
do. Oh,
beautiful
somebody did
edge-on
mention
galaxies.
Yeah, but why would we always see them facing us? So from the perspective of two of those things, they wouldn't be facing each other. Well, of course, Earth is the center of the universe, so
of course.
yeah.
Geocentrism.
But yeah, like I
don't
do
even
want to
know that
know
they
what's
believe in a
underneath the
universe.
Earth. Like,
It's all a CIA plot.
Like,
That's
is
how
it-
they're all facing us.
is it like do you see all the roots of the trees dangling off the out the bottom?
Oh, it's got to be much deeper than that. We still have oil and shit.
Yeah. So what is the theory, the flat Earth theory of gravity? That's something that I've always wondered.
They made a point of saying, "Oh, he who should not be named thinks he can refute gravity by just dropping a microphone. You can't do that." I'm like, okay, so what's your answer? They never provided anything.
Yeah, like there are at least two reasons that I can think of that they can't have the same theory of gravity that we do. I mean, one of the the reason that celestial bodies are spherical is due to gravitational effects.
That's what Ashlyn does for a living.
Right? Yeah. And
Universal acceleration. They think we're just accelerating up, and that's what's pushing everything down.
oh, that's great. I love it. So we're just on an elevator that never stops.
Yes.
Now, is it Wonkavator, or
Beautiful.
is it like looking out the front of the Millennium Falcon, or what are we doing here?
There is a flat Earth wiki I would like to bring your attention to that I found this
goody.
answer on.
Oh, good.
wiki.tfes.org.
I really, really want to see the edit wars in those comments.
Put it in the show notes here.
Universal acceleration asserts that the Earth is accelerating upward at a constant rate of 9.8 meters per second squared.
Well, there you go. So, wait, okay. No, it's hold on.
What have I done?
It is accelerating. Hold on. No, it's accelerating at a constant rate. So that would mean that the velocity would have to be forever increasing. So they can't possibly believe in a universal speed of light unless light is also accelerating.
I think
so.
Jem,
because we would be long past the speed of light by now if we're accelerating at 9.8 meters per second squared.
They had a different theory of relativity.
I also think that they don't understand science in these terms enough to use the right one. I think
No,
that
they
there's
have a lot of math in here about the speed of light. So, go
Oh,
read this
okay.
on your own time.
Okay, all right.
I just thought it would be like a pretty simple. Oh, they said accelerating
No,
at a
they're
constant.
really into
so
math, honestly. Like, they talk a lot about all the different math that they think supports their theories, and it's a mess, but
Well, I'll go read up on it, and then I'll be converted for next episode.
I'm excited. This might be the end of the podcast, guys.
Finally.
you get your lives back. So do we.
Sorry, KO'd.
I think one of the best parts of the documentary was when they had a speaker at the conference talking about how the flat earthers really are just scientists who are curious about the world and want to answer their own questions, but they didn't quite get the science education that they needed to see past some of these conspiracy theories, and that instead of condemning them and mocking them, we should be trying harder to, I guess, make sure that this doesn't happen to the next generation.
And that's a lot of the interviewees echoed similar sentiments, coming at it from different perspectives too. It was a very compassionate film. It's one of the things that I really liked about it.
Yeah. And I like that framing of it, that like these people are very curious and they want to have answers to their questions. They're just kind of missing the mark.
Yeah. They're willing to put the work in. They're willing to put time and
So
effort
much
in.
time.
So much time, and that it's their paradigm that they're in is not conducive to further learning.
Everyone wants to understand their world. Everyone wants to fit in.
Yeah.
And some people can do it in traditional society, and some people need to find their own little group.
Yeah, the central themes were community and questions. I think that's something that probably listeners of this show can get behind. So, with that done, We wanted to get back to a segment that we used to do, and ask everybody, what are you reading today?
Or what are you, not everybody reads lots of books. What are you enjoying lately?
Jem.
Oh, in terms of reading, I have been mostly tearing through the Exam Crackers MCAT prep textbooks. It's 6 of them, and they're very long, although not as long as they could be, I guess. Although I started with the 9th edition, and there are lots of errors in them. There was like
What do
3
they say about
pages
the diaphragm?
I recommend the 10th edition, which I now have. I also have been listening to an audiobook of from Exam Crackers from the mid to late aughts, and that is very not good. Lots of shock jock humor that does not hold up well. It's very bad. But it is, useful study material, I guess. I did recently finish reading the novel Alice Isn't Dead by Joseph Fink, based on the podcast, and I thought it was very good. I loved the podcast. I did miss some of the novel was much more focused on the main story and had less of the sort of Monster of the Week episodes in it. So I missed some of my favorite bits, but I understand why the story got focused and distilled down the way that it did for the novel, and it was probably the right choice. And and then I've been bouncing back and forth between some other things. I'm probably going to reread Name of the Wind again with the TV show in the works. I've been playing the video game Outer Wilds, which I highly recommend. It is, you're like a lonely explorer in this like solar system, and you're trying to solve a mystery, and there's some time stuff involved, and it's very it makes me feel things, it's got like this kind of melancholy warmth to it. That's the way I describe it. The music is so good.
KO told me that I was more right than you about Destiny, and there are definitely spaceships, so there.
Okay.
Another correction from last month.
I never said there aren't spaceships. I said that you don't drive any spaceships.
Well, I said you zoom around, and you said, no, there are no spaceships.
I did. I edited the episode. I know what I said.
Yeah.
Anyway, Laura,
there are lots of spaceships.
Jem, you missed the fact that the liver was above the diaphragm. So.
Lighthearted. This is the lighthearted end of the segment, not the end of the podcast where we all go away hating.
Okay, is anybody else reading anything?
Laura, what are you enjoying these days? Making fun of her husband. You don't enjoy things anymore?
No.
You should get help for that.
I know. It's a true story. I am. Life is very busy and I don't get a lot of time to read. And I mostly read work-related things.
Podcasts.
TV.
Quite like the Sigma Nutrition podcast. It is quite fun. Not fun. Fun is a bad word for it, but it's very informative. Can be a very good listen and a lot of topics that are interesting to me. So that's one that I've been listening to a lot. The thing that I'm into right now is I've been wanting to, but I just finally got into a local artist called Begonia. She's amazing. If you haven't heard her, you need to go listen to her. She is fantastic.
What kind of music is it?
I'm very bad at categorizing types of music, but her voice has the qualities of Adele and that kind of singing style.
You compared her to Lady Lamb as well?
The vocal qualities, the style is different from Lady Lamb, but she's got that really full, robust kind of voice, and she's just really fantastic.
Nice.
We also finally finished Veep.
I've heard good things.
Love that show.
Yeah, it's great.
His characters are so well drawn. Watching them bounce off each other and just be the worst, very enjoyable.
Lauren?
Well, I'm not reading anything right now because I have to renew my library card, and I'm not going anywhere near the Millennium Library. Well, it's all locked down.
Yeah.
So I actually have to get to a library that's not right beside my office. So all those books are locked up away from me right now. I'm reading the website Ask a Manager.
I haven't heard of this.
Oh, it's
website.
a really
Yeah,
good
she's really
advice
great.
column.
I think I've read some stuff, actually.
She's been doing it for years. It's people write in with management questions or just basically interaction with other people in the office kind of questions. In the last week or so that I've been taking a look at it, it's helped me change my perspective in the office.
Yeah, another advice columnist that I really enjoy is Captain Awkward. And
Yes.
she refers to Ask a Manager a lot for HR and what do I do about my office mates microwaving fish type questions.
Or how do I fire somebody without absolutely devastating them? That kind of thing.
Yeah, lots of good stuff.
Yeah, that's good. That's great.
How about you, Ashlyn?
I am a little bit stalled out in my book series right now, but I've been really enjoying it. It is the Night Runners, and it is a series that is fairly old by Lynn Fluellen or something ridiculous.
Well, she's not ridiculous. Just because it rations vowels like they're made of gold.
It is the Night Runner novels by Lynn Fluelling, and I guess a little bit of a spoiler, but it's the reason that I read them. The main characters are, rogues, thieves, spies, and they're totally gay for each other, and it's amazing. So, queer, high fantasy, love it.
One thing I forgot to mention when we were talking about the documentary, Patricia Steer, super into Morrissey. Like,
Oh,
way
yeah.
into Morrissey.
Yeah,
They
that's
came
not,
up
that's
at
not
the
a good
beginning.
look.
Yeah. Meat is murder, but he's still an asshole.
Since it's Pride Month, I would also like to mention the podcast Nancy from WNYC Studios. They are a podcast that explores all kinds of angles on LGBT life. And their most recent episode, as of today, June 7th, is about sex ed and getting good sex ed when you're queer, which is really hard. They interview a teen woman who is standing up in her school district for decent sex ed when they're trying to implement all these horrible changes. And they talk about how going to a program called Our Whole Lives, or OWL, really changed her life and introduced her to the fact that, she could change her pronouns and she could be who she was inside. And since I am a trained OWL educator, that was a really feel good time for me when she was like, yeah, I went to this program and I didn't think it was going to be good. My mom was forcing me to go and it was called OWL, and I was like, yay. And I think everyone should put their kids into OWL, because your local UU church will accept any children from the community to take this amazing sex ed program that your schools are not offering.
And we know from what we speak, Ashlyn teaches OWL and religious exploration. And as of earlier this month, I am now the president of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Winnipeg.
Oh, wow.
Yay, congrats!
Congratulations.
Whoops. I put my hand up. Now I run a church.
Your skeptical podcast is now being co-edited by the president of a church.
The most skeptical of churches, though.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
You looked like you remembered a podcast.
I have a really hard time remembering things that I enjoy.
I was wondering why you hadn't mentioned
What do you think I'm going to say?
Gastropod.
No. I ran through a lot of their back catalog, and so it only comes out every 2 weeks. And it's a good Wednesday when it comes out, let me tell you.
Every 2 weeks? They can do it twice a month?
Yeah. Yeah.
Gastropod.
That's
Okay,
weird.
but what were you gonna
Gastropod.
say?
Okay. Gastropod is amazing. If you like food and you like culture and you like history and you like understanding the political and social and context of food and why it is, you will love this episode.
I like these things.
You will like this show. They do a really great job of always pointing out how colonialism screwed things up.
Everything.
And how power and privilege play into all sorts of stuff there. Occasionally on the nutrition side of stuff, they make claims like, well, butter is obviously better. So they do a little bit of that kind of stuff, but there's so much good stuff. So Gastropod, yes, is amazing.
Listeners might not have the context for your opinion on that topic as a dietitian.
I'm a dietitian.
No, but I mean, like you said, you repeated the fact that they say butter is better, but you did not express an opinion on that opinion.
It's a long one, and I'm not going to be a gem. So
Also, I'm pretty sure we've covered it on the show before, so just listen to our entire back catalog and you'll come across it eventually.
all I meant is that in the culinary world, it is very common to be like, and I'm not painting everybody with this brush, but it is a very common thing to be like, well, butter is obviously better, and they go into the natural trope with those kinds of things.
Right.
And so that is all. Gastropod is great. But no, the one that I have been listening to recently that is great is called The Double Shift. And it's a really great, it's really excellent. It is well produced, and it is a podcast about mothers, but it is not about parenting, and it's not about their children. It is about mothers and their experiences, typically working mothers, and how that plays out in life. 2 of the episodes in different ways talk about the creators challenges in getting this podcast made and getting anybody to carry this podcast, because when it wasn't about kids or parenting, they said, oh, no one's going to listen to that. And, you know, about the motherhood experience. So they go through that, and they go through all sorts of episodes, including one about mothers who work in the legalized brothels in Nevada and their experience of motherhood and working and all of that. So it's well produced. It's well done. The creator shares a lot of her raw personal experience with things, which I really appreciate. And it's good listening. The first season just ended, and I think it's 8 or 10 episodes long. So go check that out.
Awesome. So that's a wide variety of stuff for our listeners to check out.
Yeah.
What are we talking about next month, Jem?
Oh, I'm not doing next month's show. I'm studying for the MCAT.
He can't.
Shit, what are we talking about next month, Ashlyn?
Next month, we'll be back with more exciting content.
Stay tuned. Mystery show.
Trans rights or human rights. Happy Pride Month, everyone.
All right, good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night. Life, the Universe, and Everything Else is produced by Jem Newman and Ashlyn Noble, with mix and tech production by Jem Newman. If you want to support the show, the best way to do that is with a review on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher, or by sharing an episode with a friend. Original music is produced by Ian James, and this episode was edited by Lauren Bailey.